Okay, sorry, I think we got cut off there. I got a phone call and it sort of messes everything up. But anyway, back to the show. Um, Independent cities also complicated the notion of three classes: those who work, those who pray, and those who fight. You also had merchants, artisans, physicians, and lawyers who, in some cases, gained more wealth than the nobles. Back then, nobility and wealth was tied to land, but with the growth of trade, now you have currency and sort of the accumulation of goods and wealth that would challenge this notion of land. Though land ownership is still and always will be a very, very, very direct means to wealth and prosperity. But it made things very awkward in the political order, to say the least. And by the late 11th century, towns demanded charters for their integration into greater self-government. They demanded sort of an official written work that made them a part of a greater nation state, because a lot of times they were more powerful than the nation state that they resided in. Whoops, let's move me up here. Um, and that somewhat led to the creation of guilds. Guilds are kind of like unions, but much more powerful than unions. They're an organization of a certain type of merchant, worker, or artisan, but unlike a union, they had control over price and quality. So you could have a textile guild, you could have a weapons maker guild, and they determine how much weapons cost, but they also determine how you're trained in terms of making the weapons and things like that, and who is a member of the guild, so that if you bought something made by that guild, you knew it was going to be good rather than a piece of garbage. And it was kind of a social support network. If a member of the guild wasn't doing well, the other members may rally to support that person, get them back on their feet. It was basically a way for regular folks to sort of look out for each other. Urban women also got new economic opportunities. Some occupations they dominated, such as textiles and decorative arts, basically making nice clothes and that sort of thing. And they took part in a wide variety of trades and butcher shops, working in fisheries and all sorts of things. The famous fishwomen of France were a huge part of the French Revolution, as we'll see later on. And they were admitted to most guilds, and some guilds even had just women only. However, women still faced very, very dire obstacles in terms of being integrated into society. With the growth of cities, we see the increase in education. The early Middle Ages saw just rudimentary education at monasteries. If you were lucky, you might learn how to write, and that was it. Occasionally, a scholar at court, but not really. In the High Middle Ages, we see with increased wealth, we have more people who can dedicate their lives to scholarship. But most schools are based in cathedrals, which you can rest assured that meant they were probably just learning about religion, studying Latin and studying the doctrine of the church. Um, on your own, you can watch this video clip from Monty Python, but unfortunately, we don't have time right now. Universities also developed. Academic guilds formed in the 12th century with both student and faculty organizations and increased standards as well. And some of these universities still stand today. For example, the University of Cambridge is one of these universities, and it is still this day the most prestigious universities in all of the United Kingdom, if not one of the most prestigious universities in the world. If you have a degree from Cambridge, pretty much any occupational door is open to you in most instances. It's basically the Harvard of the world, though Harvard may consider itself the Harvard of the world. But nonetheless, um, Aristotle was the main philosopher studied, and as we'll see in the Renaissance, a lot of people will scoff at this idea of Aristotelian scholarship, but the Latin translations by the Byzantine Greeks circulated heavily throughout Europe. As Jewish and Muslim scholars also provided certain degrees of scholarship, but scholasticism was really, really promoted by the likes of Thomas Aquinas, and basically studying Christianity along with Aristotle. But as we'll see later on in the Renaissance, this idea of just sort of studying Aristotle alone became source of, contempt and mockery. Whereas popular religion remained very popular. Christianity was king in Europe at this time. And scholasticism was basically to be Christian, very similar to how China, where scholasticism was to be Confucian, whereas Confucianism is not a religion, it's more of a life philosophy. But seven sacraments gained ritual popularity, and those are basically the sacraments you're supposed to perform as a Christian, especially the Eucharist, which is communion. But you also have things like baptism, marriage, confirmation. Those are some of the sacraments. I believe your funeral rites is the final sacrament, as well as devotions to saints. People worship saints heavily. Various saints' day were huge back then, and the Virgin Mary became sort of the saint of all saints. And to the Catholic faith today, she still is. You'll see the Virgin Mary basically all over the place. Um, there are also reform movements against the church as well. We have this sort of mendicant uprisal, where basically a mendicant is kind of like a beggar. Oh, we have a cat sighting. Say hello, Taft. Okay, enough cats. Okay, but mendicants are basically beggars, and like this guy here. But Saint Francis and Francis Dominic, were both of these sort of mendicants, where they didn't believe in the materialism that the church was sort of beginning to promote, and took vows of poverty. They became very popular because they resonated with the people who also were a little bit skeptical of how wealthy the Catholic Church was becoming. Both of these men were decried as religious zealots, and basically determined to be heretical in a lot of areas. St. Francis is also the one you commonly see depicted as being with animals and that sort of thing. There are also other popular heresies. A heresy is basically speaking, like saying a falsehood against God, and they were declared to be heretics because they were basically said to be promoting falsehoods about the Bible and that sort of thing. There were the Waldensians in southern France, who basically urged more lay control, common people controlling preaching and sacraments, that regular people could deliver the sacraments and communion. You also had the Bogomils and the Cathars, who flourished in Byzantium and Western Europe, who also promoted this sort of ascetic, like bare bones sort of Christianity, and a rejection of the official church, that you can sort of go off in nature and experience religion in that way. The government and churches of Europe both mounted vigorous campaigns to destroy both, and by the 14th century, there were very, very few Bogomils and Cathars remaining in Europe. But keep that in mind, because we'll see further challenges to Christianity, to Catholic Christianity, emerge in Europe with much more seriousness, especially in the Reformation. But the medieval expansion of Europe continued across the Atlantic and through the Baltic colonization. Nope. That's going to mess up my camera. I just know it. Nope. He's being bad. Look at how bad he is. Anyway, the exploration of various Scandinavian people into Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland, which is Canada. We do see remnants of those Scandinavian artifacts there. Increased the expansion of Europe. The kings of Denmark also converted to Christianity, and Sweden and Finland followed. Most notably, they did it to basically integrate themselves with the European trade network, to sort of ingratiate themselves with that. Moving along to Baltic expansions, but were also crusading orders, these various knights who dedicated themselves to military/religious orders, people like the Knights of the Templar, the Hospitallers, and the Teutonic Knights. The Teutonic Knights are often depicted in popular culture. They're actually oftentimes depicted by the Ku Klux Klan, as they believe themselves to be of the same spirit of the Teutonic Knights, fighting for a European Christian world. However, obviously, that's not necessarily what the Teutonic Knights fought for, in terms of, you know, racism, so to speak. Though there might have been issues of racism, especially in the Crusades when they're fighting against Muslims, but it was much more religiously founded rather than racially founded. But they were opposed to Islam and paganism, basically wanted to keep Europe Christian, keep the world Christian. They founded churches and monasteries and sought to expand the